Hey there, YouTube. This is Fragments of Mary once again, and this is part two to my question of, are some people just meant to be alone? Um, and I was just delving more into the Islamic aspect of how it's seen. Because number one, there is no dating in Islam. And I am someone that is from America, from the West, from the Midwest, and I know that there is no dating. And I think that's still a very new concept to me because I'm someone who, I mean, I've dated people in the past before coming into my religion, but I've just really begun to think about it. Like, if you don't date someone or see someone, how do you get to know them? And I understand that there's not even a lot of interaction with the genders in a flirtatious way in my religion. And I, you know, and even when I go to my place of worship, I'm not sitting with a bunch of women chatting it up. The women sit in one space and the men sit in another space. And I'm fine with that. But how do you get to know that? How do you get to know someone to marry them, to say you want to be married? That's something I've never really understood how that happens. I don't really understand how that goes. And that's a question I've had. Like, I know I'm supposed to get married, and I'm not supposed to just date and mingle and fornicate. So what do I do? And that's something that has sort of messed with me for a while. Oh yeah, and again, as I look back and forth, I'm looking at my notes that I've taken. There is another verse in the Quran I do want to check out. I believe it is Surah An-Nur, and I just forget what number that is. And then I also look at the whole, and I'll be looking it up as I'm talking. Well, the one thing you have to understand is that one, people do have their own women especially have their own prerequisites and requirements for what they're looking for in a man and what they will accept from a man and what they won't accept from a man. And I think some people just don't meet those requirements. Some people, it might be a living situation. Maybe you're living with your folks. Maybe your finances aren't good to get married. So what do you do when your finances aren't good to be married? Now, the Islam teaches that if a man doesn't have the means to marry, he should fast because fasting does curb appetite because you're fasting for the sake of Allah. And sometimes, what if the person is just socially inept and can't really deal with another person, trying to meet another person? And if I don't meet anybody's requirements, whether it be social ineptitude, vehicular situation, living situation, financial situation, am I just SOL? And I do live in a world where we are surrounded by just the social pressures to pair off and hook up. And it also doesn't help that your hormones are working in conjunction to say, hey, I want a maid, I want to get out there and do things. Okay, I found Surah An-Nur. And this is something that I looked up. And it's Surah 24, verse 33, and it says, and as for those who are unable to marry, let them live in continence, like self-control, until God grants them sufficiency out of his bounty. And that's something I struggle with. I struggle with being patient because I am a very impatient individual. Like, I really have to work on my patience. And if any of those whom you rightfully possess desire to obtain a deed of freedom, write it out for them if you are aware of any good in them, and give them their share of the wealth of God, which he has given you. And do not, in order to gain some of the fleeting pleasures of this worldly life, coerce your slave maidens into whoredom if they happen to be desirous of marriage. And if anyone should coerce them, then verily after they have been compelled to submit in their helplessness, God will be much forgiving, a dispenser of grace. Now, I'm reading this from the Muhammad Asad translation, just to throw that out there if no one knew that. And in this passage, it's saying that it's talking about slave girls. It's talking about, like, you can marry. marry a slave girl because marrying a slave girl would be better than who believed was marrying than marrying a free woman who was not a believer. And that's and of course that's back in the days when they had slavery. But all that is going on. And I just remember just wondering and just looking at it from that perspective, what do you do when you're not married? Are just some people not marriage material? And that's a question that I really wrestle with. Number one, from a religious standpoint, because I do want to get married. I don't want to just be out here slinging and genitalia slinging and all of this. Because yes, there are so many temptations out here. I mean, just today, this just being out in this hot weather in St. Louis, where I'm from, a lot of the young ladies out here are dressing very provocatively. Got hips, buttocks, and thighs, and everything else just hanging out and showing and revealing. And as a man, I still feel the tug of those feelings. But yet, you know, I have to be careful. And then, in general, I've never really been a guy that has been a chaser of women. I've never been a dude that pursues women. You don't see me chasing skirts and trying to flirt with women. I've never been that type of guy. And on one hand, I wish to have faith in my religion and say, hey, that God will provide. Yet I struggle with the whole, but I've got urges and impulses. And what if I'm not good enough to be married to anybody? And I wrestle with that. I think the worst thing you can tell someone that is without anybody, don't tell people who are single that they should find someone or that they will find someone. It's very depressing. It's kind of like a slap in the face almost. Only because I don't want to hear that. Even if there may be truth in what you say, there's still, what if I don't find anybody? You just kind of like strung me along with a false hope. And now I feel even worse. So that's really just something that I've been wrestling with. And this really was more to present the question and just explain where I'm coming from on this. And it's also an attempt for me to sort out my own personal business. Just sorting out, are we just meant to be alone? Are just some people meant to not deal with anybody? Science talks about there are some individuals that are asexual, that they have no interest in sex, that they are just asexual. But I'm not a man that is asexual. But even some people that are not asexual should I just die alone? Am I going to be one of those ones that die alone? Am I just meant to be the one that is alone? Well, YouTube, hopefully somebody will answer this or respond to this, give me a vid response or maybe even a comment just to kind of promote the discussion. Well, that's all I have really. Just I made it a two-parter because I had to get that info out on there. And there it is. So thank you for tuning in. Take care and have a beautiful day.